Peace, y'all. How are y'all feeling? Right. Um, well, we already got introduced, so I guess we don't have to introduce ourselves anymore. I just want to real quick acknowledge that we are in unceded indigenous territory, and I want to give a shout out to my relatives, the Creek and the Osage, who were here originally, as well as all the people who were forced to be here over the hundreds of years, both from the continent and from other continents. So just want to say that real quick. And with that, let's talk about virtual reality, right?
Of course. I think there's a pretty broad topic ahead of us, challenges and opportunities, so we will be all over the place. And I'd like to make clear right at the beginning, we are not the smartest people in the room. We're just asked to do this, but these will be our opinions.
Boy, yeah. I just a quick gauge of the room. How many of y'all have VR headsets at home? Okay, that's a relatively large number. How many of y'all have been in VR? Not all of you. Okay, that's surprising. But Shai has a really dope project, so y'all can all try it, right? Do you want to tell us about what you've been working on?
Yeah, it's all about accessibility for VR. I'm sure most of you have noticed it's all prohibitively expensive, or you are the product giving your data to someone like Facebook. Those are the only options to have any kind of virtual reality experience, and it's not even the highest quality virtual reality experience. There's a lot of extra technology that is hard to get your hands on and harder to set it up, I can tell you, after doing it for months. But we're trying to make that more accessible, more available. It's actually just a couple doors down that way. We've got an open house, soft opening this weekend. So if anyone would like to check it out, there's a free VR exhibit. It's first come, first serve. But the long-term goal is accessibility of virtual reality. And that's as good a starting topic as any.
Yeah, that's a really good one, actually. I was thinking, just as you're saying, there's a couple of things I wanted to just kind of like go back on before we like get into it. Just like quick background, like how long have you been working on, or like with virtual reality, and like what got you into it?
Being a huge nerd. That's the major thing. Wanting to be a part of this, it started being in the news a lot more, maybe 6-7 years ago, when Oculus was getting big on Kickstarter, money started following, and I think everybody started to really see it as real all of a sudden, not just sci-fi. Although you've been involved in this a lot longer than that, haven't you?
So Oculus came out in like 2013. I don't know if y'all remember this, like the first Oculus, even though VR has really been around for much, much longer than that. I don't know if y'all ever remember like the 90s VR, like Nintendo. What was the Nintendo one called? Do you remember? Virtual Boy. Yeah, that was an attempt, it was like not that great, but it kind of worked. But yeah, I started back in 2011 is when I really started getting into it, but not necessarily, well, I was calling it virtual reality because I was building virtual worlds that people could participate in, but really more akin to video games. And then in 13, Oculus came out and we were like, okay, this is what we got to get into because it only makes most sense. Can y'all hear us okay, by the way? I can't hear myself. It's a monitor. Can the audio get turned up a little bit? Yeah, there you go. Nice. Oh, hey. Yeah, better?
I might need to talk into
There we
this
go.
better.
Okay, yeah, much better.
That makes sense. Or I can yell.
Okay, yeah, but that's how I got into it. And I got into it from also being a huge nerd, but mostly from an art perspective. So I was in art school at the time, and I was making a lot of digital art, what some of y'all might know as like NFT art, which is not real, whatever. We're not going to get into that conversation. Yeah, exactly.
We have an hour. We could.
But I was making art with computers, and I thought, for me as an artist, I thought, well, the greatest tool that an artist can have in the 21st century is a computer, right? So what you could do with that? And then once VR came into the game, I was like, okay, well, now I don't have to just show people, these cool worlds that I'm imagining. I can actually have them experience them, right? Like I always say that if the surrealists had had VR accessible to them, they would have flipped out, right? Because like they wanted to show these crazy dream worlds, but they could only do it through painting. And it was dope at the time they did it. But now we have something that we've never had in the history of humanity to play with. So that gets really exciting, right? I mean, we're still on the positive side of VR. We're gonna get into the dark side soon, but yeah.
And I would say to add on to that, it's a great point. The era of computers is underway or even just starting. We can act as though it's something everybody understands, but it's so new, and VR is just a continuation of that. It's a better way for humans to interface with technology. And it's not the final form. There's going to be even more in the future, truly sci-fi territory. And I think that we're all going to get to be experiencing it. Ideally, we're creating for it. And a lot of people in this room I know are involved in that as well. I think we should treat that with the responsibility that it deserves. This is a wild west of an industry. We're creating the best practices. There are none at the moment. And the same way that early cartoonists decided dogs like to pee on fire hydrants, which they'll pee on anything, but we all associate that. They also love T-bone steaks, and when you smell something delicious, you float up, stuff like that. They were just messing around, but it has stuck with us, and they created culture. I think we should take some moments to recognize that what we do now, even just as a win, just fucking around sometimes, will matter. Just because we're in it so early.
Well, so I think this is also like, we're talking about accessibility, and I'm from Mexico. I flew here from Mexico City. I've lived in America for many years, and I've been very lucky and very privileged to have been able to go to a university where I had access to these tools, where I had early access to these tools. But that's not true of the majority of my compatriots, right? Like in Mexico, it's like a whole different ballgame, and like getting a VR headset. I mean, it's becoming easier, but even like 2-3 years ago, it was very niche. Still today is very niche, but a little cheaper. But how much is an Oculus Quest now?
They just raised it
they do.
$100 recently.
To 400?
Bold move for a 3-4-year-old product.
Word. But the thing is that $300 in America is pseudo accessible to average people, more or less. In Mexico, $300 it's a lot of money, so it's like you can't just get to that. And in America, it's the same thing, right? Because again, if you are affluent, wealthy person that lives near a central city, you might have access to this technology. If you don't, forget about it. So like who has the access to develop this, right? Who is going to be creating programming for this, and who is it for? And I think that's the question that gets like really tricky, right? Because actually, even as you said, Wild West, Wild West has this weird, fun, fantasy connotation. For me, it's a terrifying connotation. For me, it means like invasion, it means death, it means, destruction. And when I think about the power of virtual reality in comparison to media as we know it, it's exponential, right? We've seen, I think probably every single one of you here has experienced what it's like to see something reflected on television and wish that you were that, right? Or know somebody who, has to get this surgery or this diet or this clothing or this car in order to feel complete because of the messaging that we get through these screens, right? So if we understand as a fact the media can have an effect, a profound effect on our psyches, what does it mean when the media is no longer on a screen and we become completely immersed in media and our brains don't know the difference between virtual experience and a real experience, right? So,
I think that's a great one to bring up. And my personal opinion is that this isn't, it feels dramatically different, but it isn't different from what we've seen before. Other things we've used, cell phones, the internet in general. It's not different, it's just more. So the same effects will be present, but more intense and more both damaging and creating. I think there is as much potential for positive and negative in any technology. It is a tool, and it's based on how you use it, especially a newer technology, which traditionally legislation will never be keeping up with technology. So And we have no real guidelines, so we need to create them for ourselves. We need to police our own community. And I don't know what that's going to look like when. So currently, the VR landscape for anyone who isn't following is mostly indie developers and Facebook, who buys indie developers. But that's not going to be the case for long. Apple is set to announce 3 different headsets, something like that. They've got things in the works. There's the Pico. It's basically TikTok making a headset. A lot of big companies are getting involved, and that's because they're seeing more money.
For sure. And again, like, I mean, where you're saying it, well, to touch on 2 things, right? Like on one, like, yes, it's a tool, it's a double-edged sword. It has, it can have a lot of potential benefits, and we should definitely jump on those. And then another thing that you're touching on is you just said, Facebook, Pico, aka TikTok, aka the Chinese government,
All socials,
right?
yeah.
And then who else did you say? Oh, Apple, right? So for me, it's like, well, cool. Let me just like let these white men, giant corporations give me the world that I'm going to live in, or control the environment where I can build my little worlds if I want to. So the question is, how do we make this? How do we break out of, and I don't know if you have the answer, I don't have the answer either, but how do we, is there a way to create a true independent space? Because, and I guess let's drop the big word, right? Metaverse. Like, so what is the metaverse really? Because what Facebook is trying to claim that's not the metaverse, right? The metaverse is much larger than that. So maybe do you want to explain? Does anybody here know what the metaverse is? A few people? Okay, a little bit, okay. But y'all heard this word for sure, yeah? So go ahead.
Everywhere. Yeah. What I find interesting about Facebook's co-opting of the metaverse term and rebranding and all of that is, one, no, it's not. But also, metaverse is not that crazy a concept. World of Warcraft was a metaverse by the definition of it. Early chat rooms were metaverses. I don't think so. Anyone who's interacted with the metaverse probably knows that it sucks. It's not fun to be in. It's riddled with issues, and maybe some business clients use it, but that's kind of it as far as I know.
Right. I think that the simplest way to explain the metaverse is like it's the internet, but in 3D space. So instead of going to Walmart.com to order some groceries, you go into Walmart.vr and then you do some virtual shopping or something, so that, but theoretically the metaverse wouldn't be controlled by one corporation, but rather it would be like the internet. It's just this open space that anybody can build whatever they want in. So again, if we have somebody like Facebook claiming like, oh, we're going to make the metaverse, that becomes extremely problematic, especially when we've seen, their history, but for example, their history in other countries, right? And how in countries in Southeast Asia, people don't know the internet, they only know Facebook. So they think Facebook is the internet. Correct.
Because it's free on everyone's phones.
Exactly.
And the internet is not free, so obviously
exactly.
everyone's going to use them.
So the question is, do you think they're going to try to do that with us?
Yes.
And the metaverse? They're like, oh, check it out, come to the metaverse, but it's really Zuckerberg.
Zuckerberg has seemingly been in hot water recently. The board of his company is not entirely on board with how much money that they're hemorrhaging to get a foothold in this virtual space. Now that is very, very likely to change, and he has explained that he's trying to get in there, take up as much market share as possible, which he has done very, very well. And then when it's profitable, when everybody else gets into it, they will already have this foothold. They'll already be the big name and be the metaverse. I worry that a lot of technology nowadays is less about what is the best product and more about what is the flashiest, what can create an emotional, it's an emotional argument. That's a lot of what Apple did. And then what's the easiest for people? If you make it convenient, people will do it and use it. That's pretty clear to see.
So maybe let's talk about some use cases, right? Because I think, again, like I got into VR to make art, and my whole idea was, okay, I can do crazy stuff. I can like Whatever I imagine, I can make it happen. Any limitations I used to have as far as like budget for an installation, I don't have to worry about. I can create as wide as I can, and then when people go into the headset, they can see my vision, right? Which is cool. But that was 10 years ago, and I'm totally in a different place now. So now I'm thinking about like what are the deeper applications of this technology? Who is it really for? What is it for? So I'll just start with one example that I really like because it's kind of like exemplifies the perfect double-edged sword, and then we can dive more into it. So one of the early examples of uses in VR of VR, in my experience, a positive one, is actually for the treatment of PTSD, in particular with returning veterans, right? So I think that this is a really interesting scenario, right? So again, to your brain, even if the graphics are total trash, your brain doesn't exactly know the difference between the virtual world experience and the physical world experience. Your brain is just experiencing, right? Like a dream feels real, virtual reality, even though you know that you're in VR, your brain registers it as an experience, right? So that's cool. So with that knowledge, it means that, let's say, for example, a soldier who was driving a Humvee and hit a roadside bomb and lost his friends and is traumatized for life, comes back and then goes into VR therapy. This VR therapy can show him a recreation of the space where he was in, the Humvee he was in, and then he can go through the road, and instead of a bomb exploding, nothing happens, and he just makes it from point A to point B. The first time he does this is going to be terrifying for him. This is classic exposure therapy in psychology, but of course to the nth degree with virtual reality. And then as he does it over and over and over, eventually he will replace the memory, the traumatic memory, for a much calmer memory. That doesn't mean it's going to completely remove it, etc., but it is going to certainly have effects that were previously impossible, right? Because before, this had to be done through talk therapy or drugs, etc., etc. This is a fascinating leap that's possible with virtual reality. And of course, this can apply to any type of traumatic event. Now, with that being said, the content that is being pushed on Oculus and other Valve and other platforms is, for example, what's this zombie thing called? Dawn of the Dead? Right, Dawn of the Dead. No, Walking Dead. Walking Dead.
And Arizona Sunshine is pretty
That one too, pretty brutal. Both of them are intense, right? So this is a simulation where literally these like undead humans charge at you and you have to stab them in the head to get them off of you, right? So again, your brain doesn't know the difference between the real, even though you can rationalize, hey, like I'm just playing a game. I've seen people rip the headset off their head, right? And scream. Like, so here's that's the double-edged sword, right? You can cure PTSD with this technology. You can inflict PTSD with this technology. So yeah, seriously, I mean, it's insane. So again, like, who do we want to have their hands on this, right? Who can be truly responsible? And like you were saying, like, well, we need legislation, right? Somehow, or some entity that can say like, hey, this is bad, don't do it, or like, hey, don't show this to my kid, right? But who is going to do that? Like, I mean, the U.S. government, it doesn't necessarily work very quickly, and they don't catch up with these kinds of things, right? Like, they usually ask like, why doesn't my wife like my pictures on Facebook, instead of like the real questions. So I don't know. I know it's a huge question, but I just wanted to put those examples, and maybe you can throw some others.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think any government would first be able to legislate this accurately, but also enforce it very well. Digital content is only getting more and more free, especially as we talk about decentralized options for everything, which is, like it or hate it, it's the way things are going. There might still be centralized and controlled methods for this digital information, but also there will be decentralized options. We either work with that or we don't. But I think it all comes back to self-policing. Maybe there's a group that will come out, a virtual ethics board or something that everybody decides to respect, and they put in the work, and you look at what they say. But that's not a perfect solution, and we can't control what people are allowed to make. We can't control what people are allowed to publish. Only the platforms can do that on their own platform, which they're going to use that just because why not? Money. But everything that you're saying about the responsibility of developers is completely accurate. Just as much potential to help with mental anything as hurt or cause it. And I think this is the most important to consider when it comes to children. My educational background is in developmental and industrial organizational psychology, and I did all of my research on how video games and virtual spaces affect kids in their development, particularly moral development, which is the most scary. But
unless they play Zelda, then it's actually good.
Zelda's wonderful. Masterclass in everybody enjoying it the same and it being wholesome content for the most part. Only Ganons were hurt. And then he comes back, so like it's not even that bad. 1,000 years. But I think that is something that is only going to have a greater effect over time. It's, like I said before, the same as the internet. We didn't know how to police the internet, especially when it came to kids. And a lot of people in this room grew up with the internet being this free, creative, but also scary place. And now parents are sort of learning, hey, I don't want to make a social media account for my child. They're too young for that. Or, hey, I'm going to control some of their searches or keep them from the internet. But is that even a good thing? I don't know what the answer is, but I can say with some certainty that I believe, I'm just going to hedge a little more there, I believe it'll be the same thing. Virtual reality has everything new, vaping, virtual reality, internet, whatever. It has implications that we will not understand. Most of those implications will be the strongest when it comes to children. And we either care or we don't, but I wonder if the outcome is the same.
Can you tell me again, what was your background that you studied?
General psychology, but my focus was on moral development in developmental psychology.
That's really cool. I think actually we need more people that have that kind of background developing VR, right? Because so what I think is really interesting is like this is it's not an entirely new world that we're building. It's a world on top of our world, right? And our world is not by any stretch of the imagination perfect, right? Socially, it's very weird. We have all kinds of stratifications, problems, gaps. It's pretty bad, actually. I mean, overall, I give it like a, I don't know, 3 out of 5 stars, maybe 2.5. I don't know.
Wouldn't be born again.
Not great, yeah. Samsara is weird. Anyways, but the question is, okay, so we're building these worlds and they're going to be somewhat a reflection of ours. So really what we're talking about is not actually VR. We're talking about how do we become better humans and therefore whatever we build will be better, right? Because again, like VR is just a tool. A knife is just a tool. It has a million different uses, right? Which one do you can build a house with it, you can hurt somebody with it. So what do you want to do, right? So I really kind of, something just sparked as you were saying that. I feel like maybe it's about like how we, like when we're building these worlds, it's not just, it's about how we build the teams underneath it. Like, and it may be like having like like a mandatory, psychologist is part of how we build it. A mandatory, representative of each part of the different communities that are going to be participating in these worlds, right? Like it should really be like how can we build an equitative virtual world in a non-equitative physical world?
Yeah, it's interesting how people are trying to take virtual worlds and make them more like this one. And yeah, as you say, this world isn't perfect. Why wouldn't you just iterate and make a better one? The craziest example of this is forced scarcity in games. I will never understand why in a space where you have functionally limitless resources, and of course when it's the balance of the game, that's totally fine, but I'm thinking like, I don't remember what it was called, but there was a virtual real estate thing. It was trying to be Second Life, I guess, in VR. And you could have certain amounts of land and space and certain items that you could use. This is a virtual world that could go on forever or have multiple dimensions, or you host it on your machine. You can do anything. and they limited how much space people could have. Why? Who cares? Who does that help? Obviously, the person who made it and wants to meter it out for something in return, but we shouldn't be okay with that. And I think that's the user. You vote.
Are you talking about Decentraland?
Might be. There have been a lot of things coming and going in this space. I almost.
Well, I think that one's a funny one, right? Because has anybody here heard about Decentraland? A few of y'all? Do y'all have land in Decentraland? No? Okay. I don't either. I have land in real life. Also that's really the point of this talk. Grow your own food, get some land. Decentraland. So basically it's this virtual world built on Ethereum. And I think, it came out maybe a few years ago and it was very affordable. And now I think Snoop Dogg has a mansion in it that he's developing. And if you want a plot of land next to Snoop Dogg's, you gotta fork over, whatever thousands of dollars, so you can have a video game land plot next to Snoop's that you'll never meet anyway. So it's like, what's happening here? It's really trippy to me. And I think as somebody that's been in this industry for 10 years already, and I see like it's getting to this peak where like now it's like really getting popular and like the next 10 years are going to be wild.
We say that every year.
No, but
bubble's going to burst.
Like for real this time, right? Because Meta is blowing all this money into, even though they're bleeding, like they're doing it on purpose. They know they can take the loss. And they're like, okay, we're just going to take the loss, set the infrastructure. And then when everybody jumps on it, we're the kings, right? That's pretty much their idea.
Lots of companies are. Apple is, of course, the biggest example of how this is just going to happen. At this point, these companies do not move in this way unless they've done expensive probes and hired a bunch of experts and made sure there's going to be a return on investment.
So here's my big question. Do we need it?
The scarcity?
VR.
VR?
Do we need VR?
Wow. I mean, it's cool.
Right.
I don't know how to describe the feeling of force choking someone in a Star Wars game. Okay, no, a fireball. A fireball is cooler. I'll go with that. The feeling of magic, things that you just couldn't do otherwise. Flying in VR, if it doesn't make you sick, delightful. I think that the potential to give us experiences and communicate, like you said, and a lot of your art, you put what's in your head onto a virtual canvas, you have fewer limits. Yeah. We can communicate better through technology. We're only going to get better with that. VR is a part of it. And I think that could be wonderful, as wonderful as it could be terrible.
Yeah. No, I mean, and like my question is ambiguous because I as I think of many reasons why we shouldn't have it, I also think of reasons that can help. Some of the positive that I can also think of is like, for example, like complex machinery training, right? Like, so if you are, if you want to get a job operating a crane, I mean, like those things are crazy and like you can hurt a lot of people if you do it wrong. So, just go and some VR training. Easy. I mean, it's super easy to translate that machine into VR. You can have it exactly as it is in real world and zero liability. Nobody will ever get hurt, right? Like simulations have been popular in, the military, for example, for many, many years now, right? To precisely not risk the lives of others or to destroy equipment that is very expensive. Medical applications. I have a friend in New York who works for the Mount Sinai Hospital. He's a young neurosurgeon, and he's been using VR for his surgeries already for like 5 years, which is really trippy. And the way that he uses it is that they do a high-resolution CAT scan of the patient that has a brain tumor. Then they take that 3D scan, throw it into Unreal Engine and start manipulating and figuring out what's the best route for operating. And then on the operating table, they've already mapped the best route that is least invasive. And then homeboy is cutting stuff and then puts on the headset and then checks out where the tumor is and then gets back in there and cuts some shit. It's crazy, but it helps, and it's only gonna get better.
Absolutely, and everything is better with an undo button, especially surgery. I think that
there's no undo button, but it helps. It's like it cuts the wrong cord. Homeboy is out.
But yeah, in medical training as well, I think that more people could become doctors, become surgeons. I read somewhere, I might be totally wrong about this, but sometimes upwards of 10 students have to share one cadaver, one body
Exactly.
in medical school. And I mean, I guess that I understand how they're hard to come by, but it would be better if you could just in your room practice as much as you're only allowed to do specific surgeries at specific times. You have to really take care of it. You have to sew the cadaver up and then use it for multiple different things over the course of a year.
Well, not to mention even like the reactivity of the corpse, right? Like a corpse does not react or bleed out or the same way that a patient would in a real table. So you can't have those experiences of like, oh, oops, I caught the carotid artery. Like, it's okay.
Were you guys expecting this turn?
I have a lot of doctor friends. I don't know why. But yeah, literally that conversation about like, okay, like, what is it a better way for you to learn anatomy that is more interactive, less, I guess. Well, I don't know about traumatizing. I mean, definitely I've heard some crazy stories from my friends about, their experiences operating on corpses, whatever. But, it is a lot easier and also less expensive, less storage is necessary. I mean, you could do it from home, right? So that's kind of exciting. But the question again, like, do we need it, right? And I guess like I'm thinking a lot about kind of back to this idea of like, okay, well, you have these really cool applications that are going to be specialized for certain professions, and then you have like the layman's VR, right? And then like, what are they consuming? Are they going to just consume a bunch of zombie shooting games and Call of Duty? I mean, actually, you know what? Perfect. We talked about this. America's Army. Let's talk about that. You all know about this video game? Yeah. A few of you do? Okay. Can you please explain to everybody what America's Army was?
It was a shitty shooting game used as a recruiting tactic by the U.S. military. They figured that if people are getting into stuff like Call of Duty, then it would be easy to just reroute part of that population, say, hey, isn't shooting people fun? You want to do it for real? Among other things. But they really wanted to push this as a project. And one of my favorite stories about America's Army, which I think we spoke about before, is how there was a tournament at one point, and a bunch of CSGO players crashed it. So these were real military.
Can you tell what CSGO is?
Yes, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, or maybe not CSGO at that, whatever Counter-Strike was at the time. This is old. But these are the most ruthless shooting game players that you can find. They will just engage in every weird behavior, but also be inexplicably really good at the game. You know about 360 no-scoping. It's just using your skills for evil, I guess. But they crashed this event. This was a bunch of very professional, super serious. We are U.S. military personnel. We're going to take this game so seriously. They were using cover and communication and all these strategies. And then the Counter-Strike players just run in and don't care, half-ass the whole thing, but wipe the floor with these professional players. And I think they tried to downplay it. They tried to cover it up a little bit, which Barbra Streisand effect. Now more people know about it because it's funny.
Well, I think that the fascinating thing about this whole setup was that, again, like the intention of this game was to kind of like infiltrate it into what was popular already with the kids, right? Call of Duty, Counter-Strike, etc. And say like, okay, well now we're going to use it as a recruitment tool, and we're going to actually create a simulation of all of boot camp. So before you could play the game, you actually had to go through a simulated boot camp. So like by the time that you say, okay, actually I do want to join the army, you've already done boot camp once virtually, right? So what's to stop that from happening again in virtual space? I mean, I'm not surprised. I'm always gonna throw my money in the bucket and say it's gonna happen. Like it probably will happen. So like we have to be very careful here about like who should be consuming that content. Like, is it okay for our kids to do that? Like, is it okay to glorify violence at that level, even if it's like to serve a greater purpose? I mean, there's other avenues for that. You know what I mean? So I think it's interesting, to have that dichotomy. And I think, I don't know how much longer do we have. Is anybody keeping time? We just have a 5-minute timer here. That's been 15 minutes. Okay, great. I think that would be a good time maybe to like start opening up the conversation, for y'all. So does anybody have any questions for us?
Is there a structure? Do you have a microphone, or do people just yell? Cool.
Yes, sir.
So, if AR VR is going to be so big, like, what is going on with Sony and Xbox?
Well, they're definitely jumping on it. So Sony did it, right? Sony's got a
They're coming out with
headset.
a second generation at some point soon of the PSVR. They've done their exact same model, focusing on exclusive content to drive people to their platform. Once they have that market share, then they can do whatever they want. It's worked okay. You can't really fight Microsoft like that, but they are absolutely involved. The only issues I see are the inherent limitations of the hardware. A PlayStation or an Xbox is really just a bad computer running a separate OS. They work, they're accessible. That's exactly what we were talking about before. They make it easy for anyone to get into this. You don't have to set it up. Building a PC is, not that hard, but not fun. You can mess it up. It's really expensive to mess up. But a PlayStation, you just buy that, you use it, you're great. So I think people have been getting into VR who otherwise wouldn't. It'll be a different kind or a different flavor of VR because that's a very different target market and market share.
And just Microsoft is building heavy on AR, HoloLens. That's like their big thing, and they're pushing more for industry than for entertainment. But I'm sure eventually Xbox will catch up as well.
You said it's called what?
HoloLens, and now they're on HoloLens 2, right? I think so.
I don't actually know about that one.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I love this conversation. Thank you very much, first of all, for your time. One of the earliest media references to virtual reality is Max, the musical, in which it is contrasted as a force for gentrification in a neighborhood where people are being evicted, not being able to pay rent. As builders on this block in particular, I know we've had this conversation, but what are you doing to alleviate the effects of this visual wave?
Well, I personally, like I said, I've been in it for 10 years, and since 2020, I've been stepping out. So my response to that is actually to, because I've been in it for so long, I'm like, now how can I use it for what I care about now? And what I care about now is essentially the liberation of Black and brown people around the world as quickly as possible and as swiftly as possible. And for me, that means access to land, access to clean water, access to clean food. And for me, that means learning to grow your own food, learning how to interact with the land, learning how to clean water. And now I'm thinking, okay, can I use these tools to teach that to people? Accessibility continues to be an issue. So it's just one of the ways, but there's many other ways. So for me, that's kind of like where it's at. Like, like the earth is our, we live in an amazing Eden and we're destroying it day by day. And when I think about VR, the thing that we haven't talked about yet is, for example, the plastic waste that comes with it. The tons of iterations, and there's already landfills that have VR headsets. I mean, like the VR headsets that I bought 5 years ago are now obsolete, and I can't do anything with them. So it's just trash. So how can we come to a better place with this technology? What is more important? What is more relevant? So maybe does that answer your question, kind of?
Yeah, I'd love suggestions for anyone else who's building in this space if you have them.
Oh, well, I would just say, trust your moral compass. Like, what do you want to see in the world, right? Like, what changes do you want to see? And it doesn't matter what technology you use. Like we were saying, VR is just a tool. So if you have a purpose, if you have something that you need to put out into the world and you want to make the world a little bit better than it already is, use whatever tools you have to do that. So that's what I would say, like, sit with yourself, meditate a little, and think about what do you want to bring to the world with whatever technology you want to use, whatever tools you want to use.
And cool stuff is a valid answer. It doesn't have to be. It's
Also
wonderful if you want to change or be a part of saving the world. That is amazing. But also, we're interested because we love the possibilities of this field and making something that deserves to exist. that's something that we can all strive for. To add on to the question about how to use generally virtual reality as a force for social good, I'm going to keep taking things back to children. I care about kids more than I care about adults. But there's a lot of power in the experiences that people have, especially formative experiences. I serve on a school board at my stepdaughter's school, and specifically the DEI Commission, Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion. And our biggest challenge right now is, hey, this is a private school. There's like 2 families of color at the entire school. So these kids are growing up in an environment where they think, I read something a while ago, a meme or something, about people considering skin tones as, black, brown, or normal. And that's weird. That's super weird. And I think kids need exposure to people who look different, act different, live different, and that can only be a positive force. So that is a opportunity that we have in virtual reality. Something that my company is trying to do. I firmly believe that in the future we'll all be one perfect caramel mocha race. And all of the characters, I don't have to pick races, just do the one. It's cool. Blend all the skin tones. Easy.
I mean, there's also beauty and diversity, right? And
Sure,
beauty,
and there always will be. We'll
Yeah.
find a new reason to hate each other the moment that one's gone. You wear purple shirts. Now we're going to go to war.
Okay, question, yes?
What do VR engineers need to consider when they're making an educational app or an experience designed for children?
You want to take that?
So there is a really fun conversation that nobody in the video game space likes to have. Do violent video games cause violence? The answer is no, but competitive games can cause aggression in the short term, aggressive behaviors. And what I have found in my research, doesn't mean it's true. I'm not a professional. I just read some stuff, wrote some stuff. But what people do affects them. Short-term behaviors become long-term internalized behaviors if they're repeated, like habits. So if you can prime or socially script someone, particularly a kid, to be in a specific mindset, then their behaviors following that are what you are truly affecting them with for the long term. An example being a pro-social game where you are acting as a superhero, you're thinking about how to help people, and then you come out of that and someone needs help, instant, not even think, you got a quest for me, I want that XP, I'll do whatever you ask. And that's great. So I think just being intentional with the behaviors that you're eliciting from people, particularly children. If it's a negative behavior, what people do affects them, what kids do affects them. If it's a negative behavior, then that will create negative ripples and not necessarily make them a bad person, but you can choose what to incentivize.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that, incentivizing things that we want to foment socially. We live in a mostly capitalistic society that dictates that we have to look out for ourselves, but that's not really the way that nature operates. Nature is reciprocal, cyclical, right? So rewarding things like compassion. Like I would like to see what does it look like for there to be a game that rewards compassion, right?
There are a few, and they're wonderful.
I'm sure, yeah, and I would love to check them out. And I can think, maybe in the back of my head, I can think of a couple. Actually, Zelda might be the most popular, but like things like that, right? Like what do you want to help create again? Like not to just repeat the same answer as before, but I think for me, like kindness and compassion are things that are really needed in this world right now. And how can we gamify them, right? And to your point about like violent games don't cause violence, that's partially true. I grew up playing Mortal Kombat, and I don't try to fight people on the street. But violent games or violent content in general does normalize the visual of violence around, right? Like I've seen people's head explode in movies, and I'm like, oh, if I saw that in real life, that would be extremely disturbing. But like, why is my psyche so used to this, right? And it's not, it wasn't my choice. It's what has been fed to me, right? So when you're considering, the future generations, like what do you want them to feel as normal, right? What do you want them to like? Should blowing somebody's head up be normal, or should being compassionate towards somebody being normal? So maybe that's something to consider.
And virtual reality, of course, is a lot more intense than
Yes.
any pancake flat screen option. This is your perspective, your hands. I've pressed G to stab in multiple games and not felt anything, but the first time I had to use my hand to stab someone in a video game, that's an icky feeling. I got over it because I want to play the game, but it was weird.
It is very weird.
Actually, the game in particular is called Accounting. It's crazy. But what they did that I find incredibly
Accounting?
interesting.
Yeah.
Like
It's
the
called
profession.
it's the same people who did, or one of the same people who did Rick and Morty, Justin Roiland.
Oh, okay.
But this character you're supposed to stab, they even put like ... and a scissor icon to show you need to cut him open. Super weird. Nobody wants to do it at first, but then his voice lines just keep going. He keeps saying worse and worse things, like keeping people in his dungeon and starving his people. He's the king. And at a certain point, you feel, all right, I can kill this guy. So that's very interesting. In game development, we usually use enemies to create conflict. Any story needs a source of conflict or it's boring. And probably, that's too sweeping a statement, but most stories use conflict because it's easy. Most stories use fighting because it's easy. And we choose what the enemies are. And it's easy to dehumanize a monster, easy to make someone a Nazi. I mean, you could shoot a Nazi in Wolfenstein, that's whatever. But then it becomes weirder and weirder depending on who you point at as the enemy.
This can be deep, so we can take one more question, maybe. Yes. Yes.
So we talked a little bit about the way that legislation may come into play with kind of containing the bad things with virtual reality. And right now we're in the information age, and we've watched information kind of take over it in a way that's sometimes not great. We have a lot of people who aren't prepared to sort of remove misinformation. They weren't really brought up and taught to compare things and make sure that we're getting the right information. So considering that lack of empowerment or education for us growing up in this age, you have the vibe for kind of a similar how to be empowered kids rather than look at control and policing and not just kids, but everybody. Like we're all basically kids in the VR age. So if you have any thoughts?
Oh man.
That's a tough one.
Yeah, because that gets into like digital literacy and again accessibility. Like who has access to know this, right? When I was in college and I started getting into computers, there was this conversation about the what do you call it, the programming clergy or like the digital clergy, or it was just like a name they were calling. But basically, the idea is like you have these people who know how to speak to computers, the same way that priests used to be the only ones that could read the Bible, right? And they're
Never
the
heard
ones.
that, but it's
You know what I mean? But it truly can be. It's like that. It's like a clergy class because it's like you know how to read these things. You know how to talk to the computer god, and everybody else doesn't. And then you have this power over them, and then you get to work for Microsoft and make $300,000 a year.
The
And
computer
everybody
god
that doesn't
told
know
me
how
I
to
should
talk to
be in charge.
computer, right? And then so the question is, how do we break that? How do we make it even? How do we? And there's a lot of like really great tools for young kids to learn how to code. There's one with the blocks. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Scratch. Yeah, Scratch is a great tool. But again, like for you to have Scratch, you have to have enough money to buy an iPad, and you have to have an internet connection, and you have to have parents that are willing to give you that kind of education. So it's a deep one. Like, how do we, especially because this thing moves so fast, right? Like from last year to this year, there's been leaps in technology. How do we keep up, right? So that it can be an even ground. I don't know. Do you have some better ideas?
An approach kind of like what Holberton does. Good excuse to talk about that. But Holberton
Plug.
doesn't teach you to code as much as it teaches you how to learn. Teaches you how to research, how to find your own resources, and how to use Stack Overflow. And that's just how it works. But I think that's the greatest value is putting more attention into teaching people how to learn, how to sort their information. And that's just going to be an overhaul of the education system. There are methods that work. They are scientifically proven. All the research supports a Montessori method, a Reggio Emilia method, some Waldorf stuff, but they're kind of culty. Still good though, because it's all student focused. They listen to the kid. They generate content and education based on the individual at that moment needs of the child. And Holberton is very similar. It's hands-on, it's personal, and leading you to learn how to solve the problem. If we can take on that approach, maybe not in public education, I would love that, but in video games, because a game like Zelda teaches you how to learn the game. They don't tell you how to do all the puzzles. They give you the puzzles and lead you into it. That kind of thinking and decision making is phenomenally powerful.
Yes, I credit Zelda with my ability to navigate maps. Literally, like for real.
And knowing which lizards to eat so that a volcano can.
That's. We're out of time. This is a great conversation, and of course, Shai is next door. Over. Can you tell us the name of your space?
Yes, it's Aru or Aru Entertainment. We're 2 or 3 doors down that way. We are open and serving coffee. About 4 o'clock, we should be the only liquor on the street, so please come see us. We split it up. Welltown gets beer, we get liquor. Also, we bought beer from Welltown, so you can get it with us too. They already made the money on the keg.
So go check it out, and we'll be around. So hit us up, talk to us, and we are excited to hear what y'all are working on.
Yeah, please say hi on the street. Make me feel popular.
Okay, well, thank you so much.